Good morning. I know it's a few minutes before 9. I just wanted to go ahead and make sure everything was up and running and recording. Um, for those few, I've seen a few thumbs up, and I do want to thank you all. I can turn my camera on as well. Good morning. So I think you're looking at content and not at me, hopefully. I see about 90 of you, 100 of you are online already. I'm not starting class yet. Don't panic. Don't panic. Okay. And don't panic because you see the slide you see. I know it's early Monday morning and you're going, oh my God, all those numbers and oh no, no. But I'm seeing some thumbs up and that's what's exciting me. We have a thing called live event Q&A and I have accessed that and about 13 of you have sent me a thumbs up on that. And so yay! Good morning. Good morning. So I'm seeing comments and things along those lines. Hopefully, while it doesn't give you, I guess it doesn't give you a mic, it does give us a way to have a little back and forth content. So I'm very excited about that. And let's see, I can dismiss. I may be a little slow because I'm the generation that when you ask questions, I have to stop and read, and I can't text and do this and talk at the same time. Kind of like talking and chewing gum for my generation. Um, and stuff. I know there are lots of questions that I've had over the weekend, and I do want to start class by doing those, so I will start there today. And I do want to make a couple of announcements. If you're not aware, your class is kind of growing like COVID. And I don't mean that in a bad way, but we have gone from just over 200 to now you're over 650 students in the class. So I do want to say that sometimes when you all send the chat messages through Teams, I don't get to all of them or I can't respond to questions that just ask, should I memorize? I do want to start class at 9. Hi, let's see. About the assignment of mortality rate of Jordan from coronavirus and its discussion. Can I send it during the night if possible, since I recently caught up? You don't need to send me your actual data and stuff. What I'd like you to do is compare it and talk to others in the class. Today, we are just going to look at those numbers. And we're going to look at the numbers related to finishing up Unit 3. And on Wednesday, we're going to actually kind of change gears. And we will, great. So on Wednesday, we're going to change gear and we're going to leave COVID behind just a little bit to talk more about NCDs. Okay? And that's the other important part. So, good morning to all of you. I'm glad I can see the announcements. So, let me start with the first thing. The screen you all are looking at right now. I don't want it to panic you. I just want, it's designed to make it easy. If you remember last week, we actually did these first 4 rates. We did crude mortality, we did cause specific, we did a PMR, proportionate mortality ratio, and we did a CF or a case fatality. Okay, this is just a nice table that kind of reminds you what am I dividing by what should be at the top of my equation and what should be at the bottom of my equation. So it just says it in words. Now, again, for those of you that weren't here last week and are new, I drew a big X through this last bar. The reason why I drew the X through here is because last year it confused a lot of students. What it's telling you is when you get your number, you would multiply that by 1,000 or multiply it and say by 10,000 people or by percent by 100 people, 100. Okay, you will for several of you and a lot of you, and I say several, but a lot of you, when you sent me your numbers, the numbers look great. And guys, you did all sorts of creative numbers. I was really impressed. Okay. Published. Okay. Additional file. We are going to be talking about it. Okay. I'm publishing, and I guess that lets all of you see the questions. Okay. Please speak slowly. Okay, we're publishing along. Now, I'm trying. So, let me go back to this and this table. I sent some of you all messages saying, oh, when you're doing crude mortality rate, you gave me a number, and it was such a small number because we're talking about Jordan's population or the global population. So we express that in numbers of like 1,000 or 10,000 or 100,000. And that's all this is saying, is kind of what we would express it as. So it's helpful, but it's not required, because I've got to be honest, when we have the exam, I will tell you, give this to me in cases per 10,000, or I will expect that you know the only thing you really need to know is that case fatality and proportionate mortality ratios are basically always given as a percent. Okay? Percent. The others we give in numbers per 1,000, per 10,000, or per 100,000, just depending on our sample size. If we're dealing with millions of people, we might say per 10,000 or per 100,000. If we're dealing with a small group of people, we might say per 1,000. We just kind of use a little bit of what we consider common sense, okay? Our judgment on that. Busy, we're fine. No need to bark this morning. Hello, look at me, we're fine. Now, so those are the first numbers. Are those estimations are placed within a certain amount of? I'm not sure I understand the question. Are those estimations are placed within the certain amount of population? Maybe if you can clarify that question for me. Try it and let me see. Now, what we didn't talk about on this slide were the bottom numbers. Notice that I can do an age-specific mortality rate. In other words, I might divide people up in age groups. I might want to compare, like we have with COVID, those that get COVID that die that are under 18, those maybe between 18 and 30, maybe another group between 31 and 50, those between 50 and 70, and maybe those over 70, because maybe it affects a certain age group more so than another. So we would use age specific just based on an age group. Now, the next several rates are all dealing with children. We have, and you need to know the definitions of the difference between a neonate, a post-neonate, an infant, and a child mortality rate, okay? And they also have fetal here. What I'm going to tell you is these are just words. And the reason why I say know these. Let me see, publish. I don't understand anything. I'm sorry. When you look at percentages, okay, or percentages, like I said, case fatality and PMR, we are always going to give as percentages. The others we will give as a number in the population. Okay? Hopefully that gets to everything. Anonymous, whoever you are. Guys, I am speaking as slowly as I can. If I go any slower, we won't cover the material. Okay? I can't go any slower. You may need to play it back and listen a couple times. Izzy, stop it. Okay? So, guys, I appreciate the go slowly, but you've got to understand I can only go so slow. Now, let's see. Look at the new. Okay. Does that answer your question specifically for the one of you that's asking about the difference between numbers, whether you use thousands, 10,000s, or percentages? Hopefully that did. Let's see. Now, what I want you to look at next, like I said, is we're going to talk about children-related rates. And when we use the terms neonate, we're using a specific definition that all doctors will recognize. When we use post-neonate, it is a specific term. When we talk about infants, we are talking about a specific age range. If we talk about children, we're talking about a specific age range. So all we're doing here is neonates are those that are born, those that die are neonates or anything under 28 days old. So they're less than a month old. Okay? Baby's born, he dies in the first 15 days, he dies, and we put him in the neonatal mortality rate because it's less than 28 days. Post-neonatal means anything from 28 days to the first year. So any child that dies that's more than a month old but less than a year old would be called post-neonatal. Okay? Infant mortality rate includes any child that dies that's under a year of age. So if you think about it, it's taking neonates and post-neonatal and combining it. So infant mortality rate is a combination of any child once they're born up through the first year. What is not on this table, and I do want you to know, so hear me loud, is child mortality rate. Child mortality rate goes from the ages of 1 to 5. Okay? The same way infant up to 1, then we go to child. Child is ages 1 through 5. A fetal mortality rate is one that dies while a baby that dies while mom is pregnant, okay? Fetal deaths, 28 weeks plus in gestation in a year. Perinatal, and don't worry, actually, I can go ahead and tell you, these are fetal and perinatal. Do not worry about knowing those. They're here for your reference. You can come back and look at them, but I will not ask them of you on an exam. Now, the only other rate that you really need to know for me is the maternal mortality rate. And that's the rate we use to see about how many moms die during childbirth. And it's the one factor that's a little bit different because before we're always looking at live births and things like that. Here, the top of our number would be the number of moms that die during a year. Okay, so if mom dies, she has a baby, and mom dies 3 months later, and it's pregnancy related, okay, we're going to add her into the maternal mortality rate. If mom dies while giving childbirth, we add her into that. There can be complications that happen in a pregnancy that could affect her, and we say those complications, if they're pregnancy related, we'll count them in the count for that first year. So that's the top of our number, how many moms died. And the bottom of our number is how many children were born that year. That's a little bit different because before we've been looking at populations a lot of times. Okay? Here we're looking at the number of live births for that year. So if there were 58 moms that died during a given year related to pregnancy causes, okay, and there were 200, let's say 32 births, okay, we would look at that and that would be our number. That's how, and I'm not, again, These are just how we set up the fraction, okay? Can I zoom in on the picture? Sure. In other words, when we come down here, when we're looking at maternal mortality rate, you're looking at deaths assigned to pregnancy over live births during the year, okay? So all this is a really good table for you to come back and go, oh my gosh, do I know what my rates are? This is a good reference for you in understanding, again, like I said, I do expect you to be able to calculate crude mortality, cause specific, proportionate, and case fatality. I would also expect that you could tell me if I use the word neonatal or infant mortality or child mortality. You would know those terms. Oh, she's talking about children between this age and this age, or babies between this age and this age. That's just some, like I said, and that's a medical definition. That will be the same no matter what class you take or anything else. When we talk about an infant, we're talking about something less than a year, okay? It's a technical definition. Now, that said, let me go forward to the next page, because what I want to do, and some of you had asked me, do I have homework? Some of you calculated great rates for me, and I saw rates from the US that you calculated. I saw estimations of PMRs for Jordan that were wonderfully done. I saw lots of you get some of you are really good at math. So it was very fun. To others of you, I said, kind of look ahead at the lecture and look at these questions and can you answer them? So let's look at this question, and this is an example. And these would be the types of questions you might expect to see on an exam. Okay, and you can see I've given you 5 multiple choice items, which is the format we use. So the question says a new doctor comes to town and asks what is the case fatality is for CVAs, cardiovascular accidents in your hospital. Now, technically, if you didn't know CVAs, you don't have to know what the word meant. I hope you are learning those things, cardiovascular accidents and things like that. But you can come down here and look. If we're talking about case fatality, what do we want to know? The number of deaths from a specific disease. So we're looking for number of cardiovascular deaths. That means it can be one of these 3 options. Over case fatality, the total number of cardiovascular accidents. So we would look down here and I would expect that you would have given me this answer here. The number of CVA deaths over the number of cardiovascular accidents. The same way that you all have been doing, and a lot of you've already calculated this when we did the Jordan rates for COVID. What are we looking at? The number of COVID deaths published on a certain day over the total number of cases of COVID in Jordan to date. That is the case fatality. Most of you calculated as of last week, it was somewhere around 1.4%. Okay. The next question says, I have a rural community clinic that serves a population of 4,000. So, my population is 4,000. Okay, that's given me one number. I looked back at last year's records and I noticed there were 200 deaths. Okay, so we've got 200 deaths out of a population of 4,000. Of those 200, 120 were all related to NCDs. Cardiovascular disease was 70 of them, 30 to cancers, 10 to motor vehicle accidents, and it goes on. I could keep elaborating. So in other words, we have 120 were all NCDs. Out of that 120, 70 were cardiovascular, 30 were to cancers, 10 to motor vehicles. Keep adding up, and it means that 80 deaths were related to communicable diseases, because if 120 were NCDs, then 80 would be related to other types of deaths, okay? Just looking at all the numbers. Now, here's where that, and these are how these questions will read all of your life. They are word questions, if you remember back in math and elementary school. Okay? What is the cause-specific death rate for cardiovascular disease? Okay, so she's asking me about cardiovascular disease. How many cardiovascular deaths were there? So I go back and I go 70. Okay, so I know how many died from cardiovascular disease, and she's asking me, they're asking for cause-specific. So they're not asking it out of deaths, they're asking it out of what? The population. So if I look at this, I would then go 120 over, 70, which is cardiovascular, over the 4,000. If you do the math, what you would find is that would come out to, and here I've done it as a percent because it's a small number, 1.75%. Okay, so I encourage you to go back home. So if you haven't tried these on your calculator, to try these. Okay, that's the correct answer. Now, let's try another one. Let's see. Okay. Hold on, I'm reading questions. Guys, the classes are automatically recorded. Okay. No, I do not download to YouTube. I do not publish on YouTube. All of the lectures are recorded. Again, you all should know that. What were the measures you won't see on the exam again? Bashar. I'll go back in a few minutes and go back to that, okay? If I go back, the two that will not be on there, fetal and perinatal, I will not ask about. Okay, fetal or perinatal, I will not ask about. Okay. Okay, and let me, I'm showing these notes, so doctor, the child mortality rate, what's in the denominator? Actually, the number of children between ages 1 through 5. It is a population number. That's a great question. Okay. So Mohammed, excellent question. It is, like I said, the number of children in the population between ages 1 and 5. How to calculate the first 4. If you can calculate the first 4, you can also calculate child and infant mortality. Okay. Omar, the fetal and perinatal are the two that you do not need to know. Okay. Okay, already answered that one. What are CVAs? Cardiovascular accidents. Okay. Tala, the fourth option, I have no idea what you're asking me. Excellent. I'm seeing some people sending me, Doctor, the previous table is all saved. Yes, guys, your PowerPoints are here. Lovely, lovely. I'm seeing some of you work the numbers. Yes, yes. Okay. Exactly, exactly. Okay. Thank you. These questions are very nice. Okay. Are you allowed to use the calculator on the exam? Yes, but it cannot be on a phone. Oh, some of you now are already giving me the answers to the newest question. I see that as well. Okay, exactly. Um, so guys, I'm trying to read and answer and talk and do everything at the same time, and it does slow me down a little bit. So if we come back here, let's go back. And this one, notice I've used part of the same numbers, but instead of asking you for cause specific to a community, I'm now asking you for the PMR. So when we look at PMR for cardiovascular disease, okay, how many cardiovascular, what are we asking for? So we have 70 deaths, and how many did we have as far as the other? 200 total deaths. So 70 out of 200 is the proportionate mortality ratio. And yes, for those of you sending me the 35, it is 35%. Excellent. These are the types of questions you will see. I might also ask you a question where I give you a rate. So I might say, based on this, we determined that blank was 35%. And I could have case fatality or PMR or incidence rate. So in other words, you would do it backwards. You would have to tell me what rate I've given you. Okay? I promise you, calculations are important and on the exam. Now, there's another rate you need to know about, and that's what we call the fertility rate. And the fertility rate depends on how we measure it. Much like other rates, how do we get the numbers? There's, first of all, a crude birth rate. The crude birth rate is the total of live births over the population of an area. So in other words, how many children were born in Jordan in 2019 over the population in Jordan for 2019? Okay, that would be the crude rate. The fertility rate, and what's really interesting is technically, you all should remember this, what? Men don't have babies. So in the crude rate, we are counting men as part of it, okay? If we look at the fertility rate, instead, we get a better estimate because the fertility rate bases it on women in the population, okay? Because only women can have babies. How many? So here we look at the number of live births over the number of females in Jordan in the population. Now, I did go back, and in 2019, Jordan's fertility rate was 2.79 per woman, okay, or 2,790 per 1,000 women, okay. In other words, for every woman in Jordan, on average, she is having 2.79 babies. Now, I know you can't have a partial baby, but that's just statistics, okay. If we compare this, we can go to the US for 2019, and we will see that in the US, we are on typical, if we look at just the female population, we have 1.77 children per woman. Now, I want you to think about this just a second. What this shows us is, think about this. You have a man and a woman, so there are two people having one baby. Okay, if the average woman is having almost 3 children in Jordan, your population is still growing. If our population is less than 2, because man and woman, 1.77, our population is starting to what? Get smaller. In other words, we're not having as many children being born to replace the people that die. Okay? So this becomes important when we start looking at trends of what's happening to a society. And we look at these trends because they are going to influence health policy. Okay? So, crude rate, number of births over the whole population. Fertility rate, number of births over the females in the population. Now, we can get a little bit more specific. we can talk about a general fertility rate because we know that females can only have babies while they're menstruating. Okay? In other words, children cannot have babies until they become until they go through puberty, and women after they go through menopause can no longer have children. So typically, on average, women are basically able to have babies between the ages of about 15 and 44. Yes, you may have heard somebody giving birth very early. You may hear of somebody giving birth much later. But this is based on average. So instead of taking all women as our bottom number, here we're going to take all women just between the ages of 15 and 44. Okay? This gives us a better measurement because we're measuring how many are being born to people that can actually have children. Okay? Now, this is the general fertility rate is typically what's used around the world. There is a difference, and in the Middle East, because of cultural reasons, they look at a marital fertility rate, which means they record the births related to married women in those ages. Okay? And again, they use between 15 and 44 or 15 and 49. That is strictly a cultural thing because in other parts of the world, you don't necessarily have to be married to have a child. Culturally, here in Jordan, it is accepted that you would be married when you have a child. So they use the marital fertility rate. But like I said, when we're looking at global places, there are parts of the world where 60% of the population is not married, but still has children, depending on where you go. So if we used a marital fertility rate, we would not actually capture the actual number of births in a community. So just so you know, these are definitions. I would expect that you could distinguish between which one is which, okay? And let's see. Before I go to the next slide, I will stop and I will take a look because we're going to move into incidence and prevalence, which we have to finish today. And I'm going to look at a few questions, okay? I was answering. Ah, thank you. Now I understand. Okay. Mohammed, I don't understand. You have to be more specific. And guys, for those of you understand what? Life, health policy, class, you don't understand your computer, it could be anything, okay? Please make sure you do put them in English to me. I don't read the Arabic, guys. Most of you all do know that. Excellent. Okay. What is the denominator to the child mortality rate? The number of children in the population between ages 1 and 5. Okay. Let's see. Excellent. Answer is 35%. Okay. Okay. Now, hold on. What is PMR? Proportionate mortality ratios. Guys, okay. Oh, please don't forget to tell us about numbers that are important in the first lecture. I will do that. Ehab, thank you. Remind me at the end of class to discuss that. Okay, please remind me again on that one because I don't want to stop right now. I want to do it at the end of class. Does the fertility rate consider women under 18? Yes, and that's why we then have the general fertility rate and the marital fertility rate. Great question. Yes, it does. Is the numbers in the U.S. and fertility rate much lower than Jordan due to the expenses and payments they got to pay in the hospital? No, it's not. Typically, what we find is next week, we're going to talk some about what we call a health transition model. So I don't want to get too far ahead, but I do want you to know we are going to talk about the health transition model. And in that, we're going to talk about the fact that as countries become what we consider more developed, what happens is they stop having children. Think back to your grandparents or your great grandparents. A lot of you probably have parents that have 5 or 6 brothers or sisters, and their grandparents have 10 or 12, and maybe there are only 2 or 3 of you. This happens as societies westernize or become developed. You stop having as many children. One, you don't need as many children. All your children are going to live predominantly. They're not going to die as young children. We no longer work in an agricultural society, so they don't do labor. And it's expensive to raise and have children. So we're looking at this continually. And to raise a couple of children now costs a lot more money. So a lot of people have fewer children because they can't afford more children. Okay. In the United States, if you want to have a child, just the cost of having a child is probably around $15,000 just to give birth in a labor ward. Okay, that's just the birth. That's not the medical care. That's not anything else. So we have lots of other costs. Okay. So we can dismiss that one. Which ages are included? Bashar, hopefully you can tell me, because we've just gone over those questions, as to which ages are included in which part of the fertility rates. Okay. Crude birth rate. I will be happy to repeat. Okay. The crude birth rate is the number of live births over the total population. It includes both males and females. Doctor, if we counted Jordan, okay. So that was done. If we counted Egypt, you'll find it higher than Jordan. Yes, actually, Jordan, we're going to talk specifically next week about Jordan's fertility rates. So we're getting there. Okay. Mohammed's asking, can I repeat this on growth? What we're talking about is typically the same way. We're using 2 totally different types of numbers. But let me try to help you a little bit, Mohammed. When we talk about for every couple, a couple is 2 people, correct? So you have a man and a woman, they have a baby. For each of them, if we have a birth rate of 2, if they have 2 children, that means that they have replaced themselves. So when they die, when both of them die, they have 2 children. So the birth rate stays the same. We're not making the country bigger. We're not making the country smaller. But if I have more than 2 children, there are only 2 parents. So we are still making the population bigger. If we have only 1 child, we're only replacing half. So the population over time will get smaller. So it's just about equal placement between life and death. And we'll see these trends. Like I said, we're gonna see curves specifically related to this next week. Okay. Now, how do you calculate a crude rate? I just touched that. Guys, there are lots of questions. Okay. Hopefully, one of you says it's easy math. I hope so. I hope so. It's not meant to be hard. Okay. Can you give us more examples to calculate, please? Yes, if you let me move forward in the lecture. So let me move forward in the lecture. We've got about 15, 20 minutes, and I need to cover some more rates. So let's talk about 2 terms that we've already identified, and now we're going to calculate those. If you remember from the very beginning, incidence is the number of new cases in a population. So if you look at this slide, it's kind of showing you the change. In other words, people coming in, people going out, how many do we get? The number of new cases in a population at a certain time. And when we look at this, what they're showing is people who die, mortality rates. So our pool changes. Just for right now, remember incidence, number of new cases, okay? Prevalence. Prevalence is the number of existing cases. In other words, when we look at the COVID rates that they publish every day on the MOH website, or if you read the Roya News, incidents, there were 350 new cases today. That's incidents. There are 6,000 people living with COVID in Jordan currently. That is prevalence. Okay? And guys, my numbers aren't real. They're just made up. I'm just giving an example. So here, this period is trying to show you, like the red people would be the number of people living in that community with the disease. Okay? So prevalence, how many in the community have it? Incidence is the new people that get it. And when we talk about prevalence, we can have what we call point or period. And we're going to learn to do both. Now, this is something I have used since I was in school. Okay, it was how it was taught to me, and it is how I teach every class I've ever had. Think of incidence and prevalence like we would a bathtub. Okay, and when you look at this, prevalence is the existing cases. So it's the water in the tub. Incidence is the number of new cases. So it's what's coming in and we're adding to the bathtub. How, if we keep add water and we don't have any way to drain it, eventually the tub is going to overflow. That's kind of what's happening with COVID right now. Because the only way we get people out of the prevalence pool are three ways. Either they die, mortality, they get better and they're cured, or they move to another part of the world. They migrate. In other words, they leave Jordan and never come back. Okay? The other thing we have to think about is we have to think about, can it happen again? There are certain diseases that if we get them, remember, we develop what we call immunity. And if we have immunity, they can't be added back in. But if they don't get immunity, like the flu, we can get it year after year. They can be added back in again as a reoccurrence. Okay? So, incidence, new cases, prevalence, existing cases. How do we get rid of existing cases? You either die, you either get better, or you move away and are no longer part of that population. Only three ways. Now, what I'd like to do is let's calculate first, and then we'll talk about some scenarios. The same way I had a table for incidence and prevalence, for case fatality, and all the other rates, this is the same thing. It is a verbal showing you what's in the numerator and what's in the denominator. Okay? And what is the goal? Incidence, new cases. Prevalence, presence or absence of the disease at a specific time. So existing cases, new existing. Okay? It's not saying anything I haven't just said. It just, for some of you, sometimes some people like it to see it one way, and some students like to see it another way. This is just another way of explaining what I've just said. Okay? Again, now let us look at the equations. Now we're going to divvy up the three types of prevalence I do expect you to be able to calculate. Point prevalence. Okay? Point prevalence is just a snapshot. How many people have COVID today? So we take the number of COVID cases today and the people in our population today. We divide it, and then we multiply it. And over here, remember, time, whether it's 1,000, 10,000, 100,000, a million, depends on how many people we have, what type of population we're working with. Period prevalence. Okay, we're going to do all of these, so bear with me, guys, and it will be easier once we do them. Period prevalence, how many people got COVID between February and March of 2019? So we take the total number of cases between February and March of 2019, and we divide it by the population in half. And you're going, huh? This is a little hard. Usually we're measuring period prevalence by year. So what I would do is I would take, and let's say I wanted to know the prevalence of something between 2018 and 2019. I would take the population for 2018 from my statistics table. I would take the population for 2019 from the statistics table. I would add the two together and divide by half, because people are always coming and going. So it's just an estimate. So we take, that's what they mean by midway. Okay, so I take the population at the beginning of the time, the population at the end of the time, I add them together and divide by 2, and that is my midway population. Okay, lifetime prevalence. This is how many people have gotten the disease ever, and we're going to look specifically. COVID is perfect to do this with. So we take the total number of people that have gotten COVID, and we put them over the population. In other words, even if they've gotten better, we count everybody that ever had COVID, not just the people that are sick with COVID right now. Do you understand? So there's a difference. Incidence is the number of people, new cases at risk. So we take how many people were diagnosed with COVID last week, okay, over the number of people that could have potentially gotten it. Now this number, the bottom, the denominator is harder, okay? What you need to do is you have to take out the people that weren't part of the that aren't at risk. Now I'm going to show you something, and this is my screenshot. Hold on. Sure this works. Yes. Okay. Give me a second. I want you to look at something with me. Okay. This is incidence and prevalence in Jordan on COVID. So let me go back and stop sharing and say share. Okay. Now, what you should be seeing is a small set of notes. Okay. I will make them bigger and make the square bigger for you. These were my notes from last week, okay? And we started doing this last week, and now we're going to finish it. On October 24th, there were 4,900 cases of COVID in Jordan, okay? You're going, wow. Do you realize in just a week that number has almost doubled? Okay. Okay, so we're using that number. On that day, there were 2,500 new cases. There were 500 deaths, and there were 800 recovered cases. What we have determined right now is if we're talking about at-risk population, okay, let's say the Jordan population, and guys, I used 11,000 or 11 million, okay? I then came down and kind of adjusted it to be a little bit better. And what I did is I said there were 10,250,000 people in Jordan. So the prevalence in Jordan on that day, 49,000, if you look right here, okay, everybody see where I am? Over the population in Jordan at that time. That equaled 0.00478. I multiplied it by 10,000. So the prevalence of COVID on October 24th was 48 per 10,000 for every 10,000 people in Jordan. Now, I also calculated the incidence. And you go, why is it 4,100? Total number of cases minus those that had are already better. So 49,000 minus 8,000 would give me, we had 4,100 deaths. I mean, 4,100 cases actually on that new cases going, okay? Over our population. Now, I took out those that got better. I also had to take out those who died. So the incidence rate at that time would be 40 per 10,000. Okay? Just a shift. And that's the big thing is with incidence, we have to take out of the denominator those that are no longer at risk. So when we talk about measles rates, we take out those that have already been immunized because they're not at risk. If we talk about foodborne illnesses and people getting sick in a restaurant, we'll take out the cases of those people that didn't eat the food that was at risk. They're not at risk because they didn't eat that specific food. They're not at risk because they had a shot that protects them from a disease. They're not at risk because they're immune. They're not at risk because they didn't go somewhere, okay? So we take them out of our population sample. Now, I know that's a little tough. Hold on. I've got to get through these slides. What I wanted to do, and what I'm going to ask you to do, and guys, share your number, please. I'm not going to have time for 650 students to send me their math. Talk to each other. I'd like for you to see if we can do something with this page. I have to laugh because I printed this page back in September. Okay? This is the difference of COVID in September in Jordan. If we use, and let's all use the same numbers, that way we should all get the same results. Let's all work with the population and say that Jordan has 11 million people. On this day, there were 69 new cases. Okay. There were 1,869 total. There were 1,367 that were recovered. And there were 15 deaths. Okay. 579 cases were border imports, and all other cases were from Amman, and it then tells you how many were in Irbid, everything else, okay? Now, using this, what I'd like you to try to do is between now and Wednesday's class, I would like you to try to calculate the cumulative incidence. Whoops, I'm sharing the wrong screen. Sorry, guys. Okay. My apologies. So everybody using this table and everything in common with everybody, okay? So we have the population, we have the number of new cases, we have the number of import cases, we have the number of total cases, we have how many recovered, how many deaths. I'd like you to try to calculate the cumulative incidence, the point prevalence on that day, the period prevalence for Jordan. Don't worry about Amman or Irbid, just the period prevalence for Jordan. And then I'd like you to answer, can you calculate case fatality and can you calculate PMR? If yes, do it. If no, why not? Okay? This is what I want you to practice on. Okay? I also had another set of data for those of you that want to keep practicing. Okay? With this data from Roya News, this was on 9/15. If you read this passage, I'd like you to figure out what rates could you calculate based on what they've given you. In other words, if you read all of this and see how many people were in the hospital and receiving treatment, and how many people had the disease, and how many got better, what was the number of new cases? From reading that, you don't have to calculate. What can you calculate and what are they? More importantly, what could you calculate from this passage? Could you calculate incidence? Could you calculate point prevalence? Could you calculate case fatality? Could you calculate all-cause mortality? What can or can't you calculate? Okay? We will start to shift because I have done these calculations and I will post them in the team. Okay? So I will post my numbers and let you check against my numbers. Please do not send me a text message with your individual numbers, okay? The class has just gotten too big. There's 650 of you now. So I will post the numbers and let you check your numbers against mine, and I will post them in the team. Now, that being said, that is the end of this section, okay? We still need to talk about some other things. So on, let's see. So I know it's at time that I need to go. We are past class time. Several of you have asked me about numbers you need to memorize. Again, I really want to be clear, memorization is not the goal here. Memorizing how to calculate rates is something you have to do. Okay? I will apply rates. Do you need to understand what has happened in Jordan right now? Yes. Am I going to ask you how many cases were there in Jordan on a certain day? No. What I want you to see is what have we started to see? The exponential growth that has happened in the last couple of weeks. The thing I wanted to discuss and did not have time, and guys, you're going to have to let me talk a little faster, okay? Because we are way behind right now, is I wanted to talk about the policies that they keep publishing. In the last 3 days, Jordan has put out all sorts of new ideas about health policies of how to deal with COVID. They also, if you've seen, and like I said in the other set of slides, if you're not reading the news, you're not staying current. And a lot of you are sending me lots of news, and I'm like, wow. But please, 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 look at the news. Look at the numbers. For those of you that aren't aware, they are now taking patients at Queen Alia. They have built 3 new field hospitals. We have had 2 plane loads come in from the UAE with relief work. They have increased the number of ventilators from 455 to 600. Problem being, if we go back and look at those early numbers that we talked about, is we have now almost 1,700 patients in ICUs in Jordan. That is more ICU beds than what we originally had in Jordan. So what is happening? They are trying to play catch up. They are trying to build more. You go, why aren't they building more? But you also saw me post yesterday very quickly about the 500 nurses that have been diagnosed. 9 doctors have died from COVID. They have not given us diagnosis of doctors, just deaths. So when we look at all of these numbers, we don't have, you're losing nurses who cannot take care of them. Okay? We're losing doctors. There's only so much. So these are continual policies. The other thing they've done, and I ask you to think about this, is they've announced that we will go on Jordan to a full lockdown come after the election on November 10th through November 14th. Today is November 2nd. That's 8 days away. Why are they waiting 8 days? We're already at a point, and if we wait another 8 days, what do you project the numbers may be then? Okay, so there is a lot going on right now. And it's understanding what we see changing and what we see happening. I don't want you to memorize, do I need to know a cough can give me this many things? You know, expose me to this many microparticles. This is not a biology class. It's a health policy class. What I expect you to know is that a cough is more dangerous than just, or as dangerous as talking face to face. Okay? A sneeze is more dangerous than a cough. When we talked about those early slides, it was about risk over duration and exposure. The more time I spend with you without a mask or even with a mask on, the greater my risk is. Okay? So you don't spend lots of extended time with people because that extends your risk. The more you go places, even if it's, I only went to 6, I go to 6 different places and I'm 5 minutes in each, that's 30 minutes of exposure. So it's understanding those pieces. Please, please, I ask you, if you send me a question that says, do I memorize this? My response is going to be yes, because it doesn't say you're learning something. Okay? Or I will stop responding just to memorization questions. There's 600 of you. And about 100 of you every day, somebody sends me a question, do I need to know this? If I have talked about it in the lectures, it's important enough that I thought it was worth you knowing. Okay? All good. I'm way past time and I know you have another lecture. You all may go or stay. I will answer questions that have been posted. Right now I see 71. So for any of you that don't have other classes, I will kind of go through and answer some of the questions that are relevant and keep those, and they will be posted into the recording. Okay. But for those of you that want to leave and have other obligations, I understand. Please go to economics and other things. I will answer the questions and then publish the whole recording, and you will be able to see my answers to your questions. Okay? Have a great day. You all can go. I'm going to answer questions and keep recording. Okay, bye. Okay. Yes. Okay, publish. When are office hours? Office hours are posted. I have virtual office hours on Tuesdays and Wednesdays from 8 to 10 a.m. where you can actually chat with me directly via video call on MS Teams or via face-to-face. So all of that is available. Again, guys, if you send me Arabic, I cannot read or answer it. Okay. So do we link advanced countries with lower fertility rates? Excellent question. Yes, we do link advanced countries with lower fertility rates. And we're going to see those when we talk about the demographic transmission model next week. Excellent question. Okay, Doc, why do we add fetal deaths to live births in fetal? Like I said, I know many of you have classes, so you may leave. I am answering the questions that were posted and am strictly answering those and recording the answers so you can hear them later. Okay, it'll be up in the folder. Doc, why do we add fetal deaths to live births in fetal and perinatal rates? Because that's how we figure out how many children there are. In other words, we're not basing it on the number of people, we're basing it on the number of babies born that year. Okay, good question. So that's been answered. Okay, yes, it's from 15 to 44, correct. I don't understand the general fertility rate. Okay, the general fertility rate, it's just a difference when we look at these numbers. Crude number of births, all the population, males, females, everybody. Okay, then we have a fertility rate, which is just number of births over number of females in a population. When we get to general fertility, we are only measuring women who are between the ages of being able to have babies. So we typically only measure women between the ages of 15 and 44. Okay, that being the general fertility rate. Because after 44, typically women start to go through menopause and they can't have children. Before 15, they haven't gone through puberty, and again, they typically can't have children. There are variations individual, but that's the general average we use. Okay. What is the difference? Okay, just did that one. Miss Doc, do the questions in the exams all have multiple choice? Yes, they are 5-item multiple choice. It is the required format by the university for all the medical classes. Okay. Is this related to lower infant deaths? So you have less births that can actually survive, therefore more advanced countries have less births. Ideally, yes. When you ask this question, is this related to lower deaths in infants? So you have less births that can actually survive. Actually, I think it's backwards. We have less births because we know they will survive. In other words, we don't need to have as many children. Advanced countries ideally have lower infant mortality rates, lower neonatal, lower maternal mortality. Therefore, we have fewer children. Okay, so I've published that one now. What age is included in the female fertility rate? Again, your slide clearly says this. It says between the ages of 15 to 44 or 15 to 49, depending on the country. Dismiss. Doctor, please, in the questions that we made some calculations on, how do we decide when we use the number of deaths or the number in the population? Depending on the rate. Okay, that's the part you have to memorize. You have to memorize which type to calculate. If I'm looking at a crude mortality rate, so those are things you have to memorize how to set up the rates, and then you use that. Okay. Let's see. Doc, is not make the population smaller. It's better for the economics of the country. Ooh, that's a Mahmoud. What an interesting question. Boy, you're a week ahead. Yeah, we probably are. Typically, there are two sides to this. We talk about do you remember I mentioned something just briefly last week, and I talked about the dependency ratio, number of those under 15 and those over 65 that don't contribute to society. Um, as long as the population that's in the working age range is bigger, we will have um, sorry, I had a question come up that I was trying to load through. So let me go back to the questions. Sorry, as I keep recording. See, I gotta find back where I was. Okay, we've already talked about general and marital rates. Didn't all multiple choice? Yes, and I published that one. Okay, just like China when it legislated law of one birth per family. Yes, that would be an example. China did regulate one child policies. That was to control their population and to bring it down in size, which effectively is done. It was way out of control. So that's absolutely. Doc, is not the population smaller better for the economics of the country? Okay, now I'm back to where I was. Now, if we look at this, it depends, like I said, on productivity rates. What happens if we have too many people unemployed, it's not good. And we'll talk about a youth bulge. The other thing is we can talk about it having something that we call, let's see, where I'm trying to think, population smaller, better for the economics of the country. If we have people in the working age range and we have smaller people that we need that are on the dependency that we can take care of, it works well. But what happens is we tend to get smaller in the dependency in the working range, and then we don't have enough taxes being generated to care for the elderly. So there's some mixed pieces to both components. We will talk about this when we talk about health transition. Okay. The fertility rate. Counted as the number of babies being born. It's counted as the number of babies born. Excellent. Okay. So it is. So if you have twins, it's 2 live births, 1 mom. See. Do we always have an accurate number of our population at any given point in time? Doesn't that need a survey? We do have a general idea, and we do have variations. There are people that just deal with those demographics, and we rely on them for them. Like I said, what we typically do is then we take the mid-year averages to try to help give us an estimate. Because on average, we can say about half leave within the first 6 months, half will come within the next 6 months. So that's why we take a population sample at time 1, time 2, add them together and divide by half. Okay, yes, now let's see. Can you please do period prevalence one more time? I can do period prevalence one more time. Period prevalence is over a time duration. So how many people have the disease over a given month or over a given year? Okay, it's not, point prevalence is what is happening on this day. It's like taking an instant photograph. Period prevalence is like having the camera track everything from point A to the end and saying what's happened during that whole duration. So that's how we do period prevalence. So we would take the total number of cases over that time and put them over the average of the total population at that time. In other words, population at the beginning, population at the end, add them together, divide by 2, and that would be our denominator. Okay? So that is addressed. Yes. What is PMR? Again, I have covered PMR several times. PMR, proportionate mortality ratio. Yes. You're still saying 91 of you are attending. Thanks. Can you please put the screenshot in the files tabs? It will help us understanding both prevalence and incidence. Guys, you have all the slides. You have the recordings. Okay, everything is already there. Okay. The screenshot of my calculations, like I said, I am going to add that into your file, and we'll have that there. Okay. For those of you that are still not quite understanding parts of prevalence and incidence, remember incidence, new cases, prevalence, existing cases. And just take a little bit of time. I went through it very quickly. Sit down, review the notes, go through it, and try to calculate. That's how you're going to learn. Okay? Doctor, why did you take out the recovered cases? They will not be reinfected. Some people might say they will. We're doing it for that time period. If we know that they're going to be added back in and there's no immunity, we put them right back in. That's a really good question, and it depends on the disease and what we know about the conditions. So a lot of times, if I was asking you to calculate right now, I would have to give you that information. This many people will have immunity, or we expect there is no immunity from this disease. So you figure that out. As you do microbiology and you study disease patterns and what is the rate of infection, what is the incubation period, what is the duration, and if immunity is given, temporary immunity, how long that duration may be, we use those numbers to actually estimate. So the math can get a little bit harder, but we're not trying to make it harder right now. Okay. Okay, I did just repeat how to calculate, so that's done. I will dismiss. Doctor, you were saying that if you and a couple had 2 children, you're replacing yourselves, but that may not be true because they are the total families that don't have children. Exactly. Exactly. I'm talking from a very simplistic point of view. In other words, some families will have less than one, but we have to figure out an average. The same way we have a class average. Some people will make 100. Some people will make 32s, but the class average, let's say, is 78. It doesn't mean that you made a 78. You went somewhere on that scale. So we calculate averages to help us figure it out. And what we know is that in general, the average in the United States is 1.77 children per family. And when we look, or per woman, and when we look at it in Jordan, we're above 2, which is 2.79. So we are still, Jordan is still growing. You're still having more children than families. Just slightly, but you're still growing. Okay? So there is that. What is the numerator for incidence? New cases on that day. If we're doing that day, yes. If we're doing a time frame, it would be the number of new cases over that time. But incidence is the new cases. So that's a good question. Okay, doctor, where should we send you our homework? Do not send me your homework. In messages, do not, hear me, do not send me your homework. I am going to publish my numbers and let you compare them, okay? Like I said, there are over 650 of you now. I cannot go through 650 math equations to check. So I'm going to give you the numbers and let you see how I calculated it. And then if your numbers don't match, then contact me. Let's figure out where to go. Okay? I am absolutely sending the screenshot. Do not worry. Okay. I covered what are the important numbers in chapter 1. I talked about that. That was specifically where I said to understand the trends. I do not want you to memorize numbers for a specific day. I want you to understand the concepts. I want you to know the difference between the 3 types of ways we try to control pandemics, given from the WHO video. I want you to know the differences of risk and exposure and how duration affects those. So you could make, if I gave you a scenario, you could actually go, this would be more important, or this would be more important, and therefore I would choose this situation. Okay? Ooh, Tolan, you asked a very nice question, and I know this is going way beyond time. You asked a question, guys, and remember, there should be nobody technically in my class right now. I'm just answering questions that were published to the live event, so they were addressed. The PCR test, you asked, can we consider the PCR test as the number of people who are at risk to get infected by the virus? Unfortunately, no. The PCR tests that they're using, yes, they are the people who are at risk, but they're those that are being identified as being at risk. Because the community spread has become so large, we can no longer use PCRs as an accurate number. Yesterday, I think they published in Jordan that the PCR rate was sitting at 16%. From the very first class when we talked about 5% being the cutoff. Ideally, you want it to be less than 5%. Jordan is showing more than 16%, which indicates that the COVID cases are still growing and growing rapidly and exponentially, and we do not have control over it. And unfortunately, PCR tests are only as good as the day they're given. You could be exposed the next day and you were negative yesterday, but that doesn't mean you're negative today. So some good question. One idea is a lockdown for 2 weeks. Absolutely. Hear what that says. I did discuss the important things from the first lecture, so okay. 30 minutes of Farah, you're asking me which to which. I'm not asking you to calculate numbers, and it depends on the person. When we looked at those slides related to risk, exposure, and duration, what I want you to understand is certain scenarios create greater risk. How long you spend with somebody, how close you are with somebody, whether they cough, they breathe, they're talking, or just sitting in the room. Weighing those options. The actual number of particles, you do not need to know, okay? But I do expect you to be able to go, okay, I'm sitting in a room and somebody's talking without a mask. I'm there for more than 15 minutes. I'm in high risk, okay? I'm sitting in a room and we're socially distanced, but everybody, and people are talking, but they all have their mask on. That has a lower risk, and we're only there for 10 minutes. So I want you to be thinking about what creates the risk, okay? And good question. Everybody I asked to leave, can you explain what does people at risk actually mean? It means those that can potentially get the disease. That's a really good question, Leigh, because in the U.S. for a long time, they said children weren't at risk and they couldn't get COVID. What we did was we protected the children, and actually children can get COVID. So they are at risk. But at risk means, are you capable of getting sick from that? Like I said, when we talk about foodborne illnesses, we'll look at a restaurant and we may identify it comes from a certain type of food. So if you didn't eat that food at that restaurant, you're not at risk for the disease. We may, with COVID, have you been in certain places where you would have been exposed? Have you done certain things that would make you more at risk? Okay, we look at those. If you are immunized against certain diseases, you are not at risk for those diseases. So we don't count you in the population pool. That's why with things like measles, mumps, rubella, all our different vaccines, hepatitis B if you've been vaccinated, chicken pox, we look at the number of people that were vaccinated, and then we find out those that aren't at risk are those that were vaccinated. Those that are at risk are those that were not vaccinated. Okay, but we also then rely on herd immunity with some of that. So good question. Next question, infertility rate. When a woman gives birth to twins or triplets, is it counted how many times she gave birth during the given? It's counted as one birth, 2 children, or one birth, 3 children for triplets. Okay. Do we have to get any books, or the slides enough? You have the reading materials that I've given you in class are in the folders. Those are the Jordan Health Profile, the WHO SDG profiles that we use at different lectures. Tomorrow or on Wednesday, we will be using part of the Jordan Health Profile looking specifically at the NCD rates that were part of the assignment reading, I think, for week 2. That's how far behind we are. Are there slides that depend on the total knowledge? I don't understand. Yes, all questions are multiple choice. Like I said, it is formatted by the university. 5-item multiple choice is what we give. The only exception is if you miss the exam. If you have to take a makeup exam, it is essay, and that is also required by the university. So you want to take your exam on time, because otherwise you have a full essay exam. In the syllabus, there's something called the WHO Health Profile. It's found in the PDF. It is in your folder. It is right there. It says the JHP. I encourage you to look in the folder. It's there. Okay, in your class materials folder. Can you calculate incidence on the new cases on one day? Absolutely. Most of the times we would do it for one day. Sometimes we may do it for a month. It depends on what we're looking at and the disease patterns, but yes. Doctor, what sort of questions are you expecting to see on the multiple choice? Like ones that we saw today when we talk about rates and other things. Remember, we have a review on November 25th for the exam. So I will discuss more of that there. What subjects, guys? I don't know the subjects yet. It depends on how far we get through the class. Do you think the new lockdown policy is a well-studied one? Because I think Jordan should apply it. I don't think the new lockdown policy is a well-studied one. I actually think it is very poorly planned, because if they wanted to have an effect right now, they would announce a lockdown coming in the next couple of days, and they would give everybody time to get everything set up, and by the weekend they would roll into lockdown. And like other countries have done, they usually give them 72 to 48 hours of notice, so there's not a panic and a rush. It also lets suppliers and businesses know how to stock an inventory for things that will expire or be out of stock by the time it reopens. I don't think it's well done. That is my personal opinion. The other thing is they're waiting 8 more days to do it. In waiting 8 more days, the cases are going to be exponential, and a 5-day lockdown will not solve it. Technically, we need at least 14 days of a lockdown, if not longer, to actually stop the spread. So there's my answer. Thank you for your question. Doctor, what data will you give in percentages and which ones in numbers? Like I said, it kind of depends on the sample size, but technically case fatality and PMR are always percents. The others, we may use percents or numbers depending on the size. The larger the sample, the more we use it with big numbers, okay? I've already done the birth rates. How many units or lectures at the midterm, however many we get through. What is the total grade? You have 50 multiple choice. Each one is worth 2 points, I guess is how you want to look at it, you know, if you count it on a scale of 100. Okay. I do encourage you all, please, I'm seeing quite a few people ask me the same question multiple times. Doctor, we divide by 2 a half period or half in a period prevalence. You add the 2 populations together and divide by 2 to get the average. Good question. Okay. Yes, you are correct. Dr. Smith. Already answered. Dismiss, already answered. Oh, who knows what will happen? This is a question about what will happen with the final exam. We don't know. Is there a possibility things could go crazy? Yep. We're living through COVID. So absolutely. I've already answered about fertility rates. Dismiss the answer. We need another question. Dismiss. Let's see. Homework. Try to calculate those rates at the end of the slides. Okay, like I said, I'm going to publish an announcement that will give you those in a few minutes, and I will also upload this video now that it is complete. I'm hoping it's complete. Let's see, dismiss, already answered. Okay, so I have gone through the questions and answered those that I, at least once for every single question that was asked of relevance, besides asking me, can I memorize? Here you go. And I hope you all, I will see you all on Wednesday so you can finish watching this recording.